instead of doing checking for location, I want to check for city. And I'll do the same here. I'll just check the city, the specific city before providing a response. So here what we're saying now is if there is an intent to request hours of operation and a CD has been specified right now in this input or earlier in the conversation, then give the right response. And we want to do the same, of course, for location information as well. We're testing against a CD if it was given, and we do the same for the individual CDs. So now when I go to private, I start a new conversation. Clear is very important when you're testing with context variables because it clears all the variables, otherwise you're working with the old stuff. And I can go here and I can say, okay, what are your hours of work in Sydney? I get the right response. Sydney stored as a CD, so it still works. And now I can say, and where is it? And I get the actual response, which is where Sydney is, because he knows the city now, which is pretty good. It's an improvement over what we had before. So context variables are fairly powerful. It's a great way to store state of the conversation with the user. But I can do better than that. What I can do now is go back to the chit chat, and when I say goodbye, I can say, nice talking to you. We hope to see you in our CD store. So when I do that, and I go here and I say bye, nice talking to you, we open our CD store. Now if I clear it and there's no CD, and I say bye, nice talking to you, we hope to see you in our store. So it's still, you want to phrase it in a way that it works, whether the value is there or not. But if there is a value, it's embedded in that string. If not, it's not part of the response. So it still works. Okay, so that's one thing that you're going to be able to do in this lab. And we'll see that there is even an easier way to do this rather than create a node that assigns the variable. Because what happens is that if you start doing it for several variables that you're trying to store, you end up with a bunch of random nodes that you have to put at the top just to do these assignments. There's a more elegant way through something called slots, and we'll see it in a moment. But before we do that, I want to show you one very common use case. Sometimes you'll see chatbot asking for the username, so that then once you give the name, it becomes a more personable type of interaction with the chatbot. So how would I do that? So the first thing I need to do is change the prompt to actually ask what is your name, right? So I may say the same things, but then I may say, what can I call you by? Or what's your name, or something like that. So I go here, I'll click clear, it will show the new prompt. So now we're asking a question to the user, so we need to collect the response. Now for names, there's a handy system entity already, and it's called sysperson, which collects names. So I'm going to turn that on. So when I go here now, and once it's done training in a moment, and I say Antonio as the name, what it will do is sysperson will detect the name. I can try it before it's done training and see if it works. No, it didn't. Okay, we can wait for it to finish training on the system entity. Okay, it's done. Okay, so this time you can see sysperson Antonio was detected. We're still not doing anything with it. We don't have a node to handle it. So we need to go back, and we're going to say, well, in this node, we're asking a question. So we need a, usually when you ask a question in a node, you will have some kind of child node to process it. So what we want to do is add a child node that maybe we'll call it collect the name, right? When do we want this to be executed? Well, when we have a sysperson right? And we can say as a response, nice to meet you, cis person. How can I help? Now, notice that in this case, we don't need to change the final action for this node, because that's what we want. We do want more input from the user, the response of what's their name. So if I go here and I clear it, it's asking for my name. And now if I say Antonio, I get, nice to meet you, Antonio, how can I help?
What if you don't respond? What if you just straight ask him to
So what happens is, good question. So let's say I ask, what are your hours of operation in Sydney? The condition, cis person, is not true. So it will just continue asking as if it's a normal question. There is a problem with this approach. There's one problem. Cis person is a nice system entity. It's useful. It will collect a lot of names. I can try, I don't know, Arun. It will still work. So it's not just North American names or English speaking countries' names. It will collect the names from various countries, but not all of them. I mean, it's a very hard problem to solve. There are all sorts of very creative and beautiful names from all over the world. I have a friend who is a writer, he's Italian, and his name is Shilton, spelled like this. And as you can see, it's not detected at all. And it's not very nice to reply, I didn't understand. You can try rephrasing when they tell you their name. So the idea is that there's a limit to, the list of all possible names. The reason why it's called Shilton is because it was the last name of a writer that his parents really loved, and so they gave him that name. I mean, there's no way to have a complete list of all possible names. It's impossible. So sometimes when you create a chatbot, one approach you have is check for cis person. If there is, great, use it. If not, just go with the default hello there, or nice to meet you. I also want to show you though how you can collect whatever the user gives you an input, no matter what. You just take it at face value. So to do that, we're going to take a different approach. Instead of testing for cis person, we want this collection to happen no matter what they type in. Whenever you have a situation where you want something to be executed no matter what, we use true as the condition. Now, instead of saying, nice to meet you, cis person, what we can do is store the name in a context variable, since now we know how to do that. So, as usual, I'm going to click on these three dots next to the then respond with. I'm going to open the context editor. And I guess we'll call it name, because it makes sense. For the value, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use the special syntax. So the value is stored in this variable called input.text. I need those kind of special markup, little angle brackets with question marks, because otherwise we will store the name as input.text, literally, which is not what we want. We want the value of it. So we need that special syntax to tell Watson, give us the actual value. So once I've done that, I can use it in the response, right? So instead of doing cis person, which we're not really caring about anymore, we're now storing it as a context variable. So I can say, nice to meet you, name, how can I help? So now if I refresh and I say, what's your name? And I'm going to say maybe Shilton again. Nice to meet you, Shilton, how can I help? Yes?
Can you put a little condition on that in case they call themselves a profanity?
Okay, so you could, but it really complicates things for sure. I think that if you are at the point where you just take them at face value, you just let them handle it. Some people are going to have fun with it, of course. Like you might say, don't bother me, right? And then it's like, nice to meet you, don't bother me. How can I help you? Right? But they kind of ask for it, so to speak.
I get this, if you go with this solution, then we won't have the other option where, what if they don't answer you, what's your name?
That's correct. If you go with this option, you're always asking for the name. You're no matter what they give you, as long as they continue the interaction, whatever they give you gets stored. So some people prefer to do the sys person. You know how a node can have multiple responses for different conditions. So you could have, as a condition, sys person, then you respond with the name of the person. Or true as the follow, like as a catch-all option in the bottom, saying nice to meet you without specifying the name. That's an option too. But I wanted to show you how to use the input text.
In the if possible recognize, can you have some regex saying that if it's more than two words, that it's not a name, it's just a it's just a question that is jump?
You somewhat. So it's not a full-blown programming language that you have here, but there are some a little bit elements of scripting that you can include. They can work with this. You can do that. So you could check for the length. You can do some basic Java. It kind of looks like Java and JavaScript combined. The language is called Spell, S-P-E-L. The documentation will show you some examples of how you manipulate strings. One thing I wanted to show you is that if the user says maybe Antonio, all lowercase, we're now storing the name as Antonio, all lowercase, which might not be ideal, right? We might want to store the name as uppercase, so more than uppercase, capitalized. So one thing we can do is, this is probably the only line of code that you'll see all day. We can kind of put a little bit of that spell language, transform it, and store the input as, we capitalize the input that we were given. So what we can do is we can say substring 01 to uppercase plus input.
The rest of the substring.
Yeah. Text substring 1. So I mean, you don't need to know this. It's part of the labs. You can just copy and paste whenever you need to capitalize. But what we're doing essentially is taking the first character from the string that the user provided, and we are making it uppercase, and then we are adding the rest of the string. Okay. So if I didn't mess it up, I can just put my name lowercase, and we'll store it as uppercase, which is a bit nicer. So now we're storing the name in a context variable, which means it exists for the duration of the conversation. So what else can we do with it? Well, we can go into the chit chat and make the interaction a little bit better. So now, instead of saying no worries, we can say no worries name, right? So when the user says thanks, no worries Antonio. And we can say also for the goodbyes, we can say nice talking to you name. So now, when we have the full conversation, we're gonna give the name, nice to meet you, then we're gonna ask about maybe hours of operation in Sydney, we get the response, and we say bye, we have the name and we have the city, and we got a nice talking to you Antonio, we hope to see you in our Sydney store, which is, I guess, the ideal response you get from a human, but the chatbot handled it all on its own. What else? Well, there's a few things we can do to further improve the chatbot. One thing, as I mentioned earlier, is the concept of slots. So slots allow us to do this assignment of context variables if an entity is detected, but they also allow us to ask for the city if it's not specified. So they really simplify the process of creating the dialogue flow, so we don't have to use children nodes, they automatically ask the questions, they work really well. So to give you an example of how they might work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a, maybe we'll start with an intent. So this is a flower shop chatbot. Maybe people might ask about flowers recommendations. So let's do that. Let's create a flower recommendations. So the questions that people might have is, do you have flower recommendations for Valentine's Day? Flower suggestions, flower recommendations, which flowers for wedding, can you recommend me some flowers, which bouquet should I buy, and so on. Once Watson is done training, as usual, we'll be able to detect questions about flower recommendations. And now we can create a node to handle the response. I'm going to say that maybe we'll deal with occasions. So we'll base our answer on the occasion. So here I can say maybe flower recommendations instead. The condition I want is that it's a flower recommendation. And here I'm going to need to reply for different occasions in different ways. So I'm going to customize and turn on multiple responses. So here maybe we'll do occasion. You want to do all of them if you have multiple occasions defined. But here, in the interest of saving time, I'm going to say maybe anniversary. And it's going to be, I recommend, I don't know, tropical, okay, not sure. Not a flower expert, despite the example I chose. So then we can say, okay, wedding, we'll say, typically, people have their own flowers. And then just to show one that has a space in it, let's say Valentine's Day, I would suggest red roses. Our I don't know, Valentine's special is available here, right? And maybe we'll let go. And of course, in this case, you want to cover all the cases, but just in the interest of time, I'm just going to cover these three. So now, when the user says, okay, what can I call you by? I'm going to say Antonio, that's fine. And then I'm going to say, can you recommend some flowers for Valentine's Day? I get the right response. Nothing new. This you have seen this before. But what I want to do is kind of change it a little bit so that I can ask the question of which occasion if the occasion is not provided. And also it would be good to store it in a context variable. Why not, right? So one way to do that is click customize, enable slots. Now a node can have multiple slots. Each slot is one question, a follow-up question from the user. So for example, if this node handles a reservation for a restaurant, you might have one slot that asks for the name of the person the reservation is for, maybe the party size, and maybe the date and time, right? So you would have three questions that you're asking the user. And by default, you will ask the first question, collect the answer, ask the second question, collect the answer, and so on. There's an option here. I don't know how popular it is because I can't really think of many times when you need to ask all of them at once. But if you enable it, you will ask all three questions at once. So it's an option that you have. Not very useful in my opinion, but that's okay. So here now we have a slot. And what we want to do is select check for an occasion. So if there is an occasion, store it in my occasion context variable. So by doing that, by not presenting a prompt, I'm just basically doing the automated approach of storing the occasion if it exists. So if I go here and I start a new conversation, I give my name, and then I say, can you recommend some flowers for Valentine's Day? Occasion does exist, so if I go into the context, you'll see that Valentine's Day has been stored, right? But now, watch what happens if I say, can you recommend some flowers, and I don't pass the flower occasion. Well, I didn't give my name. It will happen all the time when you test this by prompting the user first for the name. Okay, can you recommend some flowers? I get no response. And the reason why I get no response is that I didn't provide a fallback case. So here, this could be perfectly okay to do. I could add just a fallback here and say, I don't know, our bestseller list is available on our site. And maybe we'll link it, right? So now if I do it again, I say Antonio, and then I say, can you recommend some flowers? Our bestseller list is available. If I do specify a specific occasion that we handle, I get the flowers for them. So that's fine, but some people might say, well, no, if the user is asking for recommendations, they have to provide me with a specific occasion. So what we can do is we can make this slot mandatory, required, by saying for which occasion are the flowers. So if I do that, I will always have an occasion context variable. So it doesn't make sense to have this true case at the end, because we're always asking for the occasion. There's never going to be a situation where there's no occasion. So I can get rid of that. And now, because we're using the occasion context variable, as always, we want to switch to that instead of using an entity. We have a little bit of a problem in a second, as you'll see. If I do this, it's not going to be too happy. So with context variables, you need to make you can't use that syntax with the colon. You need to use this different syntax, which is equal, which is programming speech for make sure they're equal. And then the string between quotes, Valentine's Day. That's only if you have a space in the entity value. If you don't, like wedding and anniversary, you can just use the familiar colon syntax. So now what we're saying is this. Okay, I'm going to give it the name, and that's okay. Now, when I ask a question, if I ask for flower recommendations and I provide the occasion, I don't get asked the question. It just gets assigned automatically, and then we respond based on which occasion it is. If I tried, it works as expected. However, if I ask the question and I don't provide the occasion, I get that the slot is required, so now I get asked the question. For which occasion are the flowers? So now, let's say wedding, and now I get the response. Typically people have their own flowers, right? You probably want to be a little bit nicer in your response, but that's the idea. So that's a very easy way to have one node that automatically assigns the context variable, asks the follow-up questions to require the information from the user, and handle the response based on the response that you get from the user. It's a very compact way. And again, I could add multiple slots and ask more questions. So you would have a very easy way to collect all the information you need in one node and then do something with it, whether it is maybe storing it, booking it in a system, connect to a system like OpenTable if you were a restaurant, and reserve that particular spot. Now, since we use this slot system, it seems to me that we could use the same approach for hours of operation and location information. So instead of using these two nodes here and having this weird assigned CD in the middle, we could just use a slot for both. If they ask for 4 hours of operation, we can decide to ask for the CD, and the same for location. And that way we just end up with 2 simple nodes. It really simplifies things for us. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this assigned CD. And don't worry, when you do the lab hands-on, you're going to go step by step. All the steps are outlined, so it takes a while, but we'll go through the whole process and it will make 100% sense. Right now I'm just showing you what is possible and how you go about doing it. So I got rid of the assigned CD, so right now I don't have really a CD being assigned, but what I can do is, here basically the location provided under hours of operation is the one that actually has all the information. I don't want to have to retype all of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it under flower recommendations. I'm going to say below the node. And I'm just going to get rid of all these 3 of hours of operation. So now I'm just going to call it still hours of operation. The condition is still hours of operation, hours info. Okay. But now I want the slot so that we automatically assign. So I go to customize, I make the slot live. So now what do we want to store? Well, we want to store the location if it's given. We called this city before, so instead of using location, I'm just gonna call it city. And right now it's optional, right? So whenever the slot is optional, you want to have a fallback situation for when the location is not provided. So I'm gonna add the true here, and I'm gonna say our store hours are available on our site. So I can go here, start a new conversation, give my name, then I'm gonna say, what are your hours of operation in Melbourne? The context variable is set by the slot. No question is asked because we haven't provided a question and we already have the location. And the right response on this line is given. All perfect. If I go back and I try a new conversation and I don't provide the city, I just say, what are your hours of operation? We're not asking questions, so we get just the general answer. But now let's say I do want to ask the city, same as we did before for flower recommendation. I'm just gonna say for which city, just for which city maybe, and I can get rid of the fallback case because we'll always have an answer here. So I'm gonna start a new conversation, give the name, and now when I say what are your hours of operation, I get for which city. Now when I say Melbourne, hours of operation. We haven't done It's a bigger problem. So let's say I say, wait, do you have flower recommendations? I'm sorry to ask again for which city. That might be okay depending on the type of chatbot you're building. But if the person is replying with a question that we know how to handle, it's a little bit rude not to handle it, ignoring it, and just keep going asking for the city. So to solve this problem, we need to allow for digressions. Okay. So when you define a slot, we know that the concept of slot is we ask for information from the user and don't give up until we get the information. But we need to accommodate for the possibility that they're going to ask a question that we know how to answer. So to do that, what we need to do is, we were into hours info, so let's go into that node. I'm going to click on customize, and you'll see there is a tab called digressions. See how it says digression cannot go away from this node. So what that means is that we can walk away from this node to go somewhere else to answer. So what I want to do instead is to enable it, right? So this will allow to move away from this node temporarily to answer another question. And of course, I want to do the same for the other slots as well. I always want to, typically, to digress if the user asks me a question that I know how to answer. You have to make sure that when you select the digression, that you click apply, otherwise it will not work. It's very easy to forget. Okay. So now, let's try the interaction again. So I'm going to give my name, then I'm going to say, what are your hours of operation, for which city, and then I'm going to say, wait, you have flowers recommendations. For which occasion are the flowers? Now I can say wedding. Typically people have their own flowers. Good, but not perfect. It's good because it does answer the last question, and that might be even what a customer care agent would do. But we kind of want often to go back to the original question anyway. So how do we do that? It's not always the case. Sometimes you just want to handle the last question and you're good with it. The user might ask again the first initial question. But if you want to come back, what you can do is basically in the digressions, you'll see how it says digression can come into this node. There's also an option to say return after digression. So here in this node with the on flag, we're saying if you were in a slot somewhere else, you can get into this slot. But here we can say, well, we want to return back to where we're coming from. And I'm going to enable that for all of them. So it works no matter which question they ask. So I'm going to enable that, and I'm going to do the same for flowers recommendations. So now, again, from the top, I'm going to say, what are your hours of operation? For which city? Then I'm going to say, wait, do you have flowers recommendations? For which occasion? So now I'm going to say, wedding. Typically people have their own flowers. For which city? Now you might want to add a little bit more context based on this interaction as you test it. You say, maybe we should say, for which city are you looking to learn about hours of operation or something like that. Just so that when you return, there's a little bit of context that you're still following up on what you were doing earlier. Now I can still say Sydney and get the answer I was looking for. So now I can switch between, I can have this in between conversations and still come back, which makes for a very, I think based on my experience with customer care agents like humans, they often don't come back. So this is actually an improvement over your average interaction. Okay, so that was a lot, obviously. but that's what you will be able to do in the sixth lab. I do want to show you that towards the end, there is the fourth and fifth quiz to be able to kind of finish the course quizzes and the final exam. If you do pass it, you get the certificate and the badge. And then you'll see that there's a sixth task, which is the homework. Create your own chatbot. Now, don't expect you to do it right now. That's perfectly okay. If you get to task 5 today, then that's okay. But it would be good if you start creating a chatbot on your own, because you learn much, much more when you try to solve problems. You have my contact information. I'll provide also a final slide with information. You can definitely email me, contact me however you like, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. And I can answer questions for sure. Definitely feel free to read the documentation. I'll link to it. Above all, if you are building a chatbot, whether it's something internal to your company or external, or maybe for a client, do feel free to get in touch with us, because we do tend to promote people who build with IBM technology. So we're going to put a little bit of IBM marketing power behind you. We can create a case study. We can come and videotape you telling your story of how you built a chatbot that solved a certain problem. So it's a win-win situation. We get to showcase that people are creating cool things with IBM products. You get the free marketing of being on IBM.com. Nice backlink to your site, which helps with search engine optimization, and a little bit of free marketing on the web. So don't be shy. Like feel free to get in touch. This site is not going anywhere. It's going to be there for months, maybe longer. We'll see. So you can come back to it. You can reference it. You can go through the whole process again on your own if you want. So you don't have to feel like the information you have now might be very fresh in your mind. Maybe 2 weeks from now you'll forget. You can come back to it. Okay. Any questions?
So I get the syntax for the uppercase. I missed that syntax you put for the uppercase for the name.
Oh, the
for the
yeah.
string.
So it's part of the in the lab. You'll find if you search for input text, it's part of the lab, and I show you the full string here.
Oh, okay.
So you'll be able to copy it over if you want. Yes.
Going further, how do you integrate, with an e-commerce store, for example?
Yeah.
Things like that. How does that happen?
I'll answer that in 2 parts. So, you know how we picked WordPress because it's very popular as a content management system?
Yep.
Over 50% of the e-commerce on the web actually use something that is powered by WordPress. It's called WooCommerce. We are working towards integration with WooCommerce, so then you'll be able to get maybe the user order information or products from your catalog and all of that to make your life a little bit easier. But in general, regardless of WooCommerce, you are able to execute API calls from any node. So there is, as part of the documentation, there is a section in the documentation called from a node. And they show basically how you can go inside of a node, you can specify some advanced features that actually make the API call.
Right.
Obviously, then you can do CRUD operations on some kind of remote service, storing to the database or retrieving information from the database. It's more the domain of programmers, of course, but it does make it more dynamic over just a simple frequently asked question type of scenario. So this is ideal for e-commerce. The example they use has to do with the weather API, but it doesn't really matter. The same principles applies to whatever you're doing. Good question. What I'm going to do, instead of showing you the advanced concepts, I think you're all familiar with the link at this point. is actually leave the last slide with my contact information, so you can take it down. And not we have all the time. I'm just putting it there so that you can take a note or a photo or whatever you like. Okay. See, that's my contact information. That shows how available I am to you.
Link.
There it is.
There you go. Feel free to follow me on Twitter if you use Twitter. Feel free to message me. We also have Connie the Class as a Twitter handle where we post stuff related to ConnieTheClass.ai. If you're interested in other topics, ConnieTheClass.ai is a very good resource for all sorts of courses. And if you're a business and you'd be interested in having your own version of Thank you for coming. Your own version of ConnieTheClass.ai, where you can customize it so that your employees can take a customized curriculum that you decide. We do have an offer for businesses to run their own ConnieTheClass.ai. White label, you can run internal hackathons, you can do all sorts of things with it. It's a very cool technology. Feel free to contact me. It's also available, I believe, at ConnieTheClass.ai/business. But it's a really, really cool approach. So if you're interested in any way, feel free to contact me and we can discuss.
This is just a comment and not a question. I just want to observe the workshop that you written. It's very good.
Thanks so much for this
Thank you very much.
workshop. It's been really, really helpful. Yes. Thanks.